Vision and voice are increasingly just part of the AI toolset after the latest set of announcements. Hello, friends. One more slightly abnormal AI Daily Brief episode. Last couple of days, we have had to do main onlys, and so we are balancing things out with an extended headlines edition. This is all the stuff from the last few days that were smaller but still significant announcements. We're going to stack them all together, see what they all mean in concert. And we're kicking it off with the latest announcement from OpenAI's 12 Days of OpenAI /Shipmas, which is real-time vision. This is a pretty big one. Now, this feature was first demoed almost 7 months ago and was recently featured in an episode of 60 Minutes.
Draw whatever body part you want to quiz him on and have him label it. How does that sound?
That sounds like a fantastic plan.
When Brockman pointed his phone's camera at the blackboard, the AI started to quiz me.
Let's start with the heart. Anderson, can you draw and label where the heart is in the body?
It understood what I was doing, even though my drawing was pretty crude.
The location is spot on. The brain is right there in the head.
So obviously this opens up a whole world of new use cases and was something that people were really excited about. In terms of how long it took to come, it's not exactly sure what the delay was. It's possible that it just took this long to get it all right. It's also possible that in this case, OpenAI's hand was forced by Google's announcement yesterday of Gemini 2.0 Flash, which had a similar function. Either way, Vision Mode is here now. It's available to Plus, Team, and Pro tier subscribers starting this week. Enterprise and education users will gain access in January. As has become normal, the feature will be unavailable in the EU for the time being. This really does feel to me like one that's kind of hard to discuss in the context of a podcast like this. It feels as though this is likely to be one of those things that we literally can't imagine a period before it existed. There are just so many incredibly useful opportunities that this opens up and that will change the way that we interact with AI. Molly Kinder tweeted, "For the past 2 months, I've been testing ChatGPT Advanced Voice Mode for implications for work. One of my takeaways, it will be far more disruptive for jobs when voice plus real-time video and vision are combined. Exactly what OpenAI just announced." Some people started comparing the models. Alexander Gia writes, "Just tested AVM with vision for 2 hours. Impressive results. Compared to Gemini, ChatGPT response more accurate when describing things and its language is more natural. While Gemini overly focuses on vision, ChatGPT balances vision and voice input effectively." Still, I think that if you try to go search around, it's not super clear that there's one clear frontrunner here. Basically, overnight more or less, this has become a base level and expected feature for LLMs. Now, I should point out that that was not the only thing that OpenAI released yesterday. They also created a Santa mode for ChatGPT. Adding some credence to this is actually something that I had already had ChatGPT voices pretending to do, and there's going to be a lot of kids who have a very magical experience because of this. So while yes, it may not be as significant as some of the other announcements, I think this one is pretty fun. Going back a day, I have to think that OpenAI had advanced knowledge of when Google was going to make its big announcements, because on Wednesday, December 11th, the 5th day of Shipmas, while Google was announcing an extensive, valuable new set of products and agents, OpenAI was just officially announcing ChatGPT and Apple Intelligence coming together. The update came as part of the rollout of iOS 18.2, which features a number of new Apple Intelligence features. Of course, since Apple Intelligence was announced, the feature on the top of everyone's Christmas list was a version of Siri redesigned around AI. Alas, we are not there yet, although ChatGPT support does go some way. Siri can now hand off questions to ChatGPT when it can't answer them itself. For example, coming up with a recipe based on ingredients in your pantry isn't in Siri's wheelhouse, but ChatGPT can handle it with ease. ChatGPT's voice mode is also being used to enhance Siri's ability to understand commands, particularly when you stumble partway through a sentence. The example given was someone saying, "Siri, set an alarm for, oh wait, no, set a timer for 10 minutes, actually make that 5. Previously, that command would have left Siri hopelessly confused, but apparently it now just works fine. Another benefit is that Siri can now retain context to answer follow-up questions. You could ask Siri for directions and then ask it what the weather will be like when you get there. In smaller quality of life improvements, Siri can now accept text inputs rather than only being voice activated. It also now has an understanding of the Apple interface, so can provide instructions on how to use an Apple device if it's your first time using a feature. ChatGPT has also been integrated into the Apple Intelligence writing tools and camera features. Still, the whole thing just shows, frankly, how unfathomably far behind Apple is with this. This release is notably one of the first times that Apple has allowed a third-party product to interface with Apple software. And the fact that they had to shows just what a desperate state that they're in. Apple has said they're working on a version of Siri that understands personal context and can tap into the data stored on your phone, but that's still all in the future. ZeroX Bowen writes, Apple releasing Apple Intelligence as a wrapper of OpenAI is a confess to the world that its own AI sucks, its AI strategy has failed and behind the industry by years, and Siri is a total failure. This is harsh, but not necessarily all that far off. I was just discussing on a recent episode around how much better Google must feel positioning itself for 2025 as opposed to going into 2024, but Apple is still out in the tall grass, man. And yet, of course, they're still worth paying attention to. Another bit of news from Apple this week is that they are partnering with Broadcom to produce their first AI server chip. Apple's history of producing their own silicon has been a rousing success. The A4, which debuted in 2010 in the iPad and later the iPhone 4, was a game changer for system-on-a-chip design. The switch away from using Intel chips in Macs was another noticeable milestone. The latest M4 series Macs in particular are able to produce some stunning results in AI, running models as large as 70B locally. Until now, Apple has been lacking their own AI chips suitable for model training and inference at scale. Currently, Apple Intelligence features are served by silicon designed by other tech companies. At the recent Amazon reInvent conference, Apple gave a glowing report of Amazon's Trainium chips. But Apple also likely uses NVIDIA chips along with the rest of the industry. What makes this announcement enticing is Apple's history of producing silicon that's above the competition. If this chip is as good comparatively as the M4, it could push Apple's AI dramatically forward. But chip design is difficult and AI servers require an entirely different architecture to CPUs. A reasonable question is whether Apple still has the institutional knowledge to perform at that level. That pedigree likely had a lot to do with chipmaking guru Jim Keller, who was at the company between 2008 and 2012. He was involved in designing the A4 and was in charge of setting the specs for the first two editions of the MacBook Air. He's now working on his own AI silicon as the CEO of Tenstorrent. However, there are some interesting things about how they're attacking the problem. The Information reported the design will be focused on the chip's networking technology. Networking is one of the key limiting factors currently for AI training. Elon Musk's Colossus training cluster, which contains 100,000 network chips, was considered impossible right up until it was achieved. Scaling much larger than that will require a breakthrough in networking technology. Apple say they aim to finish the chip design within 12 months, so we'll have more when that comes to fruition. Speaking of both big tech and companies that partner with OpenAI, Microsoft has released a new version of their in-house language model. This is the first new generation since the release of Phi 3 in April of this year. The release was noteworthy at the time for including an ultra-small 4B model in the lineup. It was one of the most performant models that could fit on an edge device such as a phone, and was a very cheap option for developers. However, Phi 3 never really made any waves. Rivals quickly released cheaper and more performant small models, and that field has only become more competitive in recent months. With this release, it appears that Microsoft is sticking to their philosophy of working on small language models. The model is a 14B, similar in size to GPT-4o Mini, Gemini 2.0 Flash, and Claude 3.5 Haiku. Microsoft is highlighting the model's performance in math problems in particular. Phi 4 outcompetes in this category against Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro, OpenAI's GPT-4o, and Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Sonnet, all much larger models. In overall benchmarks, the model seems comparable to Llama 3.3, but not quite as good as GPT-4o. Microsoft says the jump in performance is due to the use of, quote, high-quality synthetic datasets, curation of high-quality organic data, and post-training innovations. The release contains only a single variant, with no update to the smaller versions of Phi 3.5. Microsoft have released the new model with limited access for research purposes on their development platform, and the model will be available on Hugging Face next week. There's actually a lot that's interesting about this. First of all, there's the constant question of what it means for the OpenAI and Microsoft relationship, although it's pretty clear that even if that relationship remains persistent forever, Microsoft will increasingly hedge and think about its own models as well. But there's also the dimension of synthetic data. The Turing Post wrote, unlike models trained primarily on organic web data, Phi 4's synthetic-heavy training approach doesn't just mimic human-generated content, it redefines the learning process. Synthetic data is crafted for diversity, complexity, precision, and chain-of-thought reasoning. Synthetic data isn't cheap filler, it's structured learning. Synthetic data ensures gradual logical progression, helping the model learn better reasoning patterns than messy human-written web content. Another dimension of this is the fact that there is so much competition at the smaller model level. The AI wars are not being fought just on the frontier in the state of the art, they're being fought on the dimension of cost-effective performance that can work on a variety of devices. Speaking of which, a small one on the same front, Anthropic has released Claude 3.5 Haiku as a chatbot. The smallest and fastest variant of the lab's LLM was previously only available via API. First released last month, the model surprised by beating Anthropic's flagship Claude 3 Opus model across certain benchmarks. In particular, the smaller model was well suited for coding recommendations, data extraction and labeling, and content moderation. 3.5 Haiku still doesn't support image analysis, however, unlike the previous version in 3.5 Sonnet. In terms of use cases, 3.5 Haiku stands out as having one of the longest context windows on the market at 200,000, making it excel at processing large datasets quickly. Availability on the chatbot platform means 3.5 Haiku can now be used with features exclusively to that UX, including Claude artifacts. Lastly, we'll round out today with a couple of stories around big, interesting new company fundings. One very interesting AI startup has closed their seed funding round after seeing what you might call stratospheric demand. Lumen Orbit has raised $11 million to build data centers in space. The round valued the company at $40 million and was only open for a few days after more than 200 inquiries from VCs. The company immediately opened another round on top at a higher valuation to allow more investors in. The seed round was led by NFX with participation from Fuse VC, Soma Capital, and Scout funds from A16Z and Sequoia. Lumen Orbit was founded only in January and emerged with huge buzz out of the Summer Y Combinator class. The goal is about as grand as you would imagine. The company aims to create modular orbital data centers. The idea is that individual compute pods can be launched separately and launched into large solar arrays. The goal is to then scale these data centers into multi-gigawatt compute clusters by the end of the decade. For reference, xAI's Colossus supercluster currently uses around 150 megawatts. As surprising as this might seem, this is actually viewed as a lower cost option to building data centers on Earth. CEO Philip Johnson said, "Instead of paying $140 million for electricity, you can pay $10 million for a launch and use infinite solar. The first step is a demonstration satellite launch in May containing NVIDIA GPUs, followed by another test satellite with 100 times the compute the following year." Johnson said, "A lot of space companies take 5 years to launch. We are launching it in 18 months. We'd rather launch frequently with smaller changes than wait 5 years and launch with a ton of incremental changes." With the cost to launch satellites rapidly decreasing, the founders initially thought space solar would be a cool idea. Once they realized how difficult and energy intensive it would be to transmit the solar power back to Earth, they decided to simply launch the data centers into space as well. I don't know about you guys, but it's hard not to get excited about the level of ambition when you see something like this. Anyways, that is going to do it for this extended headlines edition of the AI Daily Brief. Over the weekend, we will have a long reads episode, and then next week will be our last week of normal episodes. We'll have a bunch of end-of-year content in and around the holidays, as you would expect. Appreciate you listening or watching as always, and until next time, peace.